The moon of Seraph hung in the void between empires, a neutral ground where the laws of war were older than the species that now gathered to witness history ships from 100 worlds filled the space around the small moon, their crews watching view screens that carried the same image across the galaxy, an arena carved from ancient stone, surrounded by representatives of every major power, and in the center, two figures facing each other. Supreme Talon Vreth stood 9 feet tall, his body encased in ceremonial armor that gleamed like black fire, his 3 eyes burning with contempt for the small creature before him. Kang Du-yun looked like exactly what he was, a battered human with scars on his skin and a simple blade in his hand. The stone from the labor camp was pressed against his chest, hidden beneath his shirt. "You are the one who has caused so much trouble?" Vreth's voice boomed across the arena. "I am. I expected something more impressive." Most people do. The watching galaxy held its breath. "Do you have any final words before I end your species' pathetic attempt at relevance?" Vreth Askedo-yun looked at the massive warrior who would almost certainly kill him in the next few minutes. And he thought about the 19 people he had kept alive in the frozen hell of Vrethka, he thought. About the millions who had walked toward freedom because someone had told them they could, he thought. About the 7 survivors who had pressed a piece of stone into his hand and asked him to carry their memory into his battle. "I have words," he said, "but they are not for you." He turned slightly so that his voice would carry to the transmission devices broadcasting the duel across the galaxy. "To every slave watching this," he continued, "to every being who has been told that they are nothing, that they are property, that their lives do not matter." Vreth growled with impatience. "I was a prisoner for 3 years," Du-yun said. "I watched people die every day from cold and hunger and cruelty. And the Keth told us that we were forgotten, that no one would ever come for us, that our only purpose was to serve until we died. Enough speeches." Vreth snarled. They were wrong. Du-yun ignored him. "We were never forgotten, and we were never powerless. And the only thing that ever truly imprisoned us was the belief that we could not stand up." He turned back to face Vreth. "Today I'm going to show you what happens when someone refuses to stay down." Vreth attacked the Supreme Talon, moved with a speed that seemed impossible for a creature his size, his massive blade carving through the air where Du-yun had been standing. But Du-yun was no longer there. He had watched Keth warriors train during his years in the labor camp, had studied their movements, had learned the patterns that they did not even know they followed. He dodged the first strike, and the second and the third, buying seconds that felt like hours. The 4th strike caught him across the ribs and sent him tumbling across the arena floor. He tasted blood and felt something crack inside his chest. The watching billions saw the human crumple, saw the Supreme Talon raise his blade for the killing strike, saw what looked like the inevitable conclusion to a match that should never have happened. And then Du-yun stood up. Vreth hesitated for just a fraction of a second. Surprised that his prey was still moving, Du-yun used that second to roll away from the follow-up strike, coming to his feet with blood dripping from his mouth. "That was a good hit," he said. "Stay down," Vreth growled. "Make this easy on yourself. I spent 3 years being told to stay down," Du-yun replied. "I got tired of listening." The attack was not a skilled attack, not the elegant blade work of a master warrior, but it was fast and fierce and completely unexpected. Vreth blocked the strike easily, but the force of it made him step back, and something flickered in his 3 eyes. Confusion. How could something so small, so fragile, so obviously outmatched, be pressing the attack? Du-yun pressed harder, his blade a blur of motion, knowing that every second he survived was another second the galaxy watched. A human refused to accept defeat. Vreth's counterattack was brutal. The massive blade caught Du-yun's shoulder and tore through muscle and bone, sending a spray of red across the ancient stone that Yun fell to his knees, his sword arm hanging useless at his side. "Now you understand," Vreth said, standing over him. "This is the natural order. The strong over the weak, the worthy over the worthless." Du-Yun looked up at the Supreme Talon. And despite the pain, despite the blood loss, despite the absolute certainty of his impending death, he smiled. "You still do not understand. What is there to understand? You are dying." "Yes," Du-Yun agreed. "But I'm not alone." He struggled to his feet, his remaining functional arm clutching the stone from the labor camp. "I carry the names of everyone who died in your camps," he said. "Everyone who was told they were nothing. Everyone who was worked to death, or beaten to death, or simply left to freeze when they could no longer produce." He stepped forward, and Vreth stepped back not much, just a fraction of an inch. But the watching galaxy saw it. The Supreme Talon of the Keth Dominion had retreated from a dying human. "Jinsu," Du-Yun said. "Marin, Kavros, Talas. Yun-He." He took another step forward. "Bren, Sola, Korath, Mako." "Yell." Vreth's blade trembled in his grip. "What are you doing?" "I am giving you their names," Du-Yun replied. "The names you took from them when you made them slaves. The names you tried to erase when you worked them to death." He took another step, and another, bleeding with every movement, refusing to fall. "They sent me," he whispered, close enough now that only Vreth could hear him. "Every single one of them sent me. And they want you to know that you will never be rid of them." Vreth's eyes widened, and for the first time in his long and violent life, he felt something he had never experienced before: fear. Not fear of death, not fear of pain, but fear of something far worse. Fear of something that could not be killed because it was already dead. He brought his blade down with all his strength. A killing blow meant to end the nightmare standing before him. Du-Yun moved not fast enough to dodge, not strong enough to block, but just enough to turn the blade, to guide it past his heart, to let it pierce his side instead of his center. And as Vreth's arm extended with the strike, Du-Yun drove his own blade up through the gap in the Supreme Talon's armor, through the joint where the chest piece met the shoulder guard, into the vital artery beneath. The two of them stood frozen for a moment, the Supreme Talon and the dying human, their blood mingling on the ancient stone. "That is impossible," Vreth whispered. "You should have learned by now," Du-Yun replied. "Humans do not care what is possible." The Supreme Talon of the Keth Dominion fell. Du-Yun collapsed beside him, and the arena erupted into chaos. But across the galaxy, in labor camps and slave quarters and conquered worlds, billions of beings watched the human do what no one had ever done before. They watched an empire's myth of invincibility shatter like glass, and they remembered Yuna found him in the medical bay 3 days later. He should have been dead. The physician said any other species would have been dead. But humans, they were learning, did not follow the rules. "The Keth Dominion has fractured," she reported. Sitting beside his bed, 18 vassal species have declared independence, and their remaining military is too busy fighting civil wars to threaten anyone. "The slaves? Walking toward freedom by the millions," she smiled. "Just as you promised them they could." Du-Yun closed his eyes and let the weight of those words settle over him. "The council has voted to offer you a position," Yuna continued. "Any position you want, up to and including a seat on the High Council itself." "No." She was not surprised. "What will you do instead?" "I need to go home," he said. "There are families who deserve to know what happened to their loved ones. People who need to hear that the ones they lost were remembered. You could send messages. Messages are not the same as standing in front of someone and telling them that their husband, their wife, their child, their parent died with dignity and was not forgotten." Yuna was quiet for a long moment. "The galaxy will call you a legend," she said finally. "The galaxy can call me whatever it wants." What will you call yourself? Du Yun opened his eyes and looked at the window where the stars stretched out toward infinity. A medic, he said. A medic who got lost on the way home. He paused, but I think I finally found the path. Yuna stood and walked to the door. Thank you, she said, for everything you have done. Thank you for choosing me. I did not choose you because I thought you could win, she admitted. I know. I chose you because I thought you would show the galaxy what humans really are. Du Yun smiled. The first genuine smile she had seen from him since the day they met. And what are we? Yuna looked at the broken, scarred, impossible man who had brought an empire to its knees without ever accepting defeat. Exactly what the universe needed, she said. And absolutely nothing like what it expected. She left him to his rest and in camps across the fallen dominion. Former slaves who had learned to hope again told their children stories about the human who carried the names of the dead and taught an empire that some things cannot be conquered. War was over, the legend had just begun. 3 months had passed since Du Yun disappeared into Keth-controlled space. Yuna stood in her war room and stared at the holographic map that had once shown nothing but defeat. 7 worlds burned with rebellion. 12 garrison commanders had been executed by their own troops for suspected treason. Supply lines that had operated without interruption for decades had collapsed into chaos, and across the breadth of the Keth Dominion, millions of slaves who had been told they were worthless were walking toward freedom. We have confirmation from our intelligence networks, Admiral Quan reported, his voice carrying a note of wonder he could not quite suppress. The Keth have lost effective control of their entire agricultural sector. Casualties? Yuna asked. On their side, approximately 40,000 military personnel, mostly killed by each other during the internal purges. And the slaves? Uncertain, Quan admitted. Many died in the chaos. But our estimates suggest that over 4 million have successfully reached the safe zones the champion established. 4 million lives saved by one man who refused to accept that the war could only be fought with weapons. What of the champion himself? We received a transmission 3 hours ago. Quan handed her a datapad. It was brief. Yuna read the message twice before she spoke. He wants to challenge Vreth directly. Yes. High Arbiter. He knows that Vreth will kill him. He seems to believe the duel will serve a larger purpose. Regardless of the outcome, Yuna set down the datapad and walked to the window, where the lights of her capital city still glowed against the darkness. She had chosen Du Yun because she had seen something in him that others had missed. Something that spoke of impossible endurance and unconquerable will, but she had never expected this. The man had waged a one-man war against an empire and won. Not through strength or violence, but through understanding, through patience, through the simple act of showing enslaved people that they were still capable of hope. And now he wanted to throw it all away in a duel he could not possibly survive. Prepare my personal shuttle, she said. High Arbiter? I am going to meet with the champion before he issues his challenge. The rendezvous point was a small moon at the edge of contested space. A barren rock that neither side had bothered to claim. Du Yun was waiting when her shuttle landed. He looked different than she remembered, leaner and harder, his body marked with new scars that told stories she could only imagine. But his eyes were the same, steady and calm. The eyes of someone who had made peace with whatever came next. High Arbiter, he greeted her with a small bow. You have exceeded every expectation, she said without preamble. The council that doubted you now speaks your name with reverence. And the species you freed are calling you a liberator. I did not free them, Du Yun replied. They freed themselves when they chose to walk toward the mountains. A distinction without a difference. No, he shook his head. It is the only distinction that matters. Yuna studied him carefully. Why do you want to challenge Wrath? Because destroying their supply lines is not enough, Du-Yun said. The Keth will recover eventually, and they will rebuild. And they will learn from their mistakes, and then they will come back stronger than before. And killing Wrath will prevent this? No, he admitted, but humiliating him will. He pulled up a holographic display showing the structure of the Keth Dominion. The Keth do not rule through loyalty, he explained. They rule through fear, and that fear is built on a single foundation. Their reputation for invincibility. Exactly, Du-Yun nodded. Every species in the Dominion serves the Keth because they believe resistance is impossible. Because they have watched the Keth crush every champion who ever stood against them. And you believe you can change that? I believe I can show them something they have never seen before, he said. A human who will not stop, who will not surrender. Who will take everything Wrath can give and still keep coming. You believe you can win? Du-Yun was quiet for a long moment. No, he said finally. Wrath is faster than me, stronger than me, and has killed warriors who made me look like a child playing at combat. Then why? Because winning is not the point. Yuna felt something tighten in her chest. What is the point? The point is to show the galaxy that the Keth can be defied, Du-Yun said. The point is to make every slave in every camp on every world look at their overseers and think, if a human can stand against the Supreme Talon, then maybe I can stand against you. You are asking me to let you die. I am asking you to let me finish what I started. Yuna turned away from him and stared out at the barren landscape of the moon she had sent millions to their deaths over the course of this war. Had watched worlds burn and fleets shatter and species driven to extinction. But none of those deaths had felt like this. None of them had been a choice. There is something you should know, she said quietly. Something our intelligence discovered while you were behind enemy lines. What? The 19 prisoners you saved in the labor camp on Vrethka. She turned to face him. They did not wait for rescue. Du-Yun went very still 2 months after you left. They organized an uprising, Yuna continued. They took control of the camp and held it for 3 days before Keth reinforcements arrived. How many survived? 7, she said. 7 of them fought their way to a stolen transport and escaped to sovereignty space. Du-Yun closed his eyes. And for the first time since she had met him, she saw something like grief cross his features. They are here, Yuna added. On this moon, waiting to see you. Why? Because they heard what you were planning. And they asked to deliver a message. The door to the chamber opened. And 7 figures entered. They were thin, scarred, marked by years of suffering. But they walked with their heads held high. Their leader was a female with silver hair and eyes that had seen too much darkness. Champion, she said. Myra. Du-Yun's voice cracked slightly. You should not have come. You do not get to decide that, she replied. You saved us when everyone else had given up. And you taught us that survival was not about waiting to be rescued. I taught you to endure. You taught us to fight, Myra corrected. Not with weapons, but with will. She reached into her coat and withdrew a small object. A piece of stone carved with symbols. Du-Yun recognized it was from the labor camp. A marker that the prisoners had used to count the days of their imprisonment. We took this when we escaped, Myra said. We kept it to remind ourselves of what we survived. She pressed it into his hand. Now we want you to carry it into the duel, she continued. So that when you face the Supreme Talon, you are not facing him alone. Du-Yun looked at the stone in his palm, and then at the 7 faces watching him with something that looked like faith. Wrath is going to kill me, he said. Maybe, Myra acknowledged. But before he does, you are going to show him something he has never faced before. What? Someone who is already dead, she smiled, and there was steel in that expression. Someone who died in that camp years ago and has been walking around ever since. finishing business that death forgot to complete. Du Yun stared at her. And then something shifted in his expression, not hope exactly, but something like clarity. Tell me what I need to do. Eunice Du Yun looked at the High Arbiter. Broadcast the challenge to every world in the galaxy, he said. Make sure that every slave, every soldier, every being who has ever lived under the shadow of the Keth sees what happens on that moon. And what will they see? They will see a human who refused to die, Du Yun replied. And maybe, if I am lucky, they will see an empire fall. The challenge was issued that night and across the galaxy. Billions of beings held their breath and waited to see what would happen when an empire met a man who had nothing left to lose. The agricultural world of Kethvorin stretched beneath him like a patchwork quilt of brown and goldoyen, watched from the ridge as thousands of workers moved through the endless fields below. Their backs bent under the weight of labor that never ended. He had been on the surface for 6 days now, moving only at night, eating only what he carried, sleeping in shallow caves that the wind had carved into the rocky hills. The Keth garrison never thought to look for him. Why would they? He was one human on a planet of 40 million slaves, and the very idea that a single enemy could threaten their operation was so absurd that it never crossed their minds on the 7th night. He made his move. The worker camps were arranged in clusters of 100. Each cluster supervised by a single Keth overseer and a squad of armed guards. Du Yun chose a cluster at the far edge of the agricultural zone, where the fields met the foothills and the patrols were stretched thin. He waited until the guards changed shifts. That brief moment of confusion when the outgoing patrol was tired and the incoming patrol was still getting organized. Then he walked into the camp. The workers stared at him with hollow eyes. Too exhausted to feel surprise, too broken to feel hope. They were a mix of species. Some he recognized and some he did not. But all of them wore the same expression of resigned despair. I need to speak with whoever leads this camp, he said quietly in the Keth language. Female of a species he did not recognize stepped forward. There are no leaders here, she said. Only workers. Then I will speak with the one who keeps the others alive. When the overseers are not watching, something flickered in her eyes. Follow me. She led him to a small shelter at the edge of the camp, where an elderly male sat repairing a broken harvesting tool. His hands were gnarled with age and labor, but his eyes were sharp with an intelligence that years of slavery had not managed to crush. You are the human, he said without looking up. Word travels fast. Word travels everywhere, the old male replied. The Keth think we do not listen, but we hear everything. Then you know why I am here. You are the champion the sovereignty chose to end the war. He set down the tool and finally met Du Yun's gaze. We thought it was a joke when we heard, a cruel joke at the expense of a dying people. And now? Now I see a human who walked through Keth security, like it was not there. And I wonder if perhaps the joke is on someone else. Du Yun knelt so that he was at eye level with the old male. What is your name? Names are forbidden here. What was your name before? The old male was silent for a long moment. Cavil, he said finally. I was called Cavil, and I was a teacher before the Keth came to my world. Cavil, Du Yun repeated. I am not here to fight the Keth. Then why are you here? I am here to give you a choice. Cavil's weathered face showed the first emotion Du Yun had seen from him, a mixture of confusion and cautious hope. What choice could you possibly offer us? In 3 weeks, the fires will start, Du Yun said. The seed stores will burn, the irrigation systems will fail, and this world will descend into chaos. You plan to destroy the harvest. I plan to destroy their faith in themselves. Du Yun corrected. When the chaos begins, the Keth will turn on each other, looking for traitors and saboteurs, and while they are busy executing their own officers, you will have a choice. What choice? You can stay here and continue to be slaves, Du Yun said. Or you can walk east toward the mountains where the sovereignty has hidden supply caches and emergency shelters. Cavil stared at him. You expect us to simply walk away? I expect nothing, Du Yun replied. I am offering you a door. And whether you walk through it is up to you. The Keth will hunt us down. The Keth will be too busy hunting each other. Du Yun smiled grimly. I have spent the last 6 days planting evidence that 3 of their garrison commanders are planning a coup. That is impossible, Cavil breathed. They will tear the garrison apart. Yes, thousands will die. Thousands are already dying, Du Yun said quietly. Every day in camps like this one, across every world the Keth control. And the galaxy has decided that those deaths do not matter because they are quiet deaths, invisible deaths. Deaths that do not threaten anyone who matters. He stood and looked out at the endless fields. I'm going to make those deaths matter. He continued. I am going to make the Keth pay for every life they have taken, every family they have destroyed, every world they have burned. How? By showing the galaxy that their empire is built on foundations of sand, and by showing you that you were never as powerless as they wanted you to believe. Cavil rose slowly to his feet. There are 47 camps on this world, he said. Nearly 3 million workers. Can you reach the others? We have ways of passing messages, the old male admitted. The Keth never bothered to stop us because they assumed we had nothing worth saying to each other. Then tell them what I told you, Du Yun said. Tell them to watch for the fires, and tell them that when the chaos begins, the Eastern Mountains are waiting. And you? I will be gone before the fires start, Du Yun replied. I have 6 more worlds to visit before I am done. 6 more worlds, Cavil repeated in wonder. You intend to do this 6 more times? 7 agricultural worlds feed the Keth military, Du Yun explained. When I am finished, their armies will be starving, and their officers will be so busy accusing each other of treason that they will not notice their empire crumbling around them. 1 human against an empire. 1 human who has nothing left to lose, Du Yun corrected. That is a very different thing. He turned to leave but paused at the edge of the shelter. Cavil. Yes? When I was in the labor camp on Vrethka, there was a guard who used to beat the weakest prisoners for entertainment. The old male said nothing one night. I put something in his food, Du Yun continued. Nothing that would kill him. Just something that would make him sick for a few days. What happened? His commander assumed he was malingering to avoid duty and had him executed for cowardice. Caval's eyes widened. You killed a Keth guard without ever touching him. A Keth killed him, Du Yun said. I just gave them a reason. He disappeared into the darkness. And Cavil stood alone in the shelter for a long time, thinking about fires and mountains and the strange human who had walked through an empire like it was, made of smoke. 3 weeks later, the fires began. They started in the seed storage facilities, spreading faster than anyone could contain them because someone had replaced the fire suppression chemicals with accelerants. Then the irrigation control systems failed, not from sabotage but from a series of small malfunctions that cascaded into catastrophic breakdown, and then the accusations started anonymous messages to the garrison commander, suggesting that his subordinates were planning to overthrow him, falsified transfer orders that moved troops away from critical areas, equipment failures that could only be explained by deliberate sabotage. Within 2 days, the garrison commander had executed 4 of his own officers within 4 days. The surviving officers had begun accusing each other within a week. The Keth military presence on Keth Varan had effectively destroyed itself, and in the chaos, nearly 2 million slaves walked east toward the mountains. Supreme Talon Vreth received the reports with growing disbelief. 1 world, his intelligence chief reported. 40% of our agricultural output from that sector. Gone. Find whoever is responsible. We are trying. Supreme Talon, but there is no evidence of external attack. And the garrison's own records suggest internal treason. Then the traitors are all dead. Supreme Talon. Executed by their own comrades before anyone could interrogate them. Vreth's massive claws dug furrows into the arm of his throne. What of the human champion? We have had no contact, no sightings, nothing. Then this is unrelated. That is our current assessment. Yes, Vreth dismissed the intelligence chief with a wave of his hand. But something cold had settled into his chest. Something that felt almost like the first whisper of doubt, 300 light years away. Du-Yun landed on his second target world and began walking toward the nearest worker camp. He had a message to deliver. The quarters they gave him were fit for a General. Du-Yun stood in the center of the luxurious room and felt nothing but the weight of memory pressing down on his shoulders for 3 years. He had slept on frozen stone with 17 bodies huddled around him for warmth. Now he had silk sheets and climate control on a window that looked out over a city that still believed it might survive. He turned away from the voyeurs' comfort and sat on the bare floor. Instead, his body remembered stone. Better than softness. The door chimed, and a young officer entered with a datapad clutched nervously to her chest. Champion, she said, using the title that still felt like a joke. I am Lieutenant Beek Sumin, and I have been assigned as your liaison. Just Du-Yun is fine. She hesitated at his informal tone, but nodded. The High Arbiter has authorized you full access to our military resources. She continued. We have prepared a selection of the finest weapons and armor from 17 different species. And our combat instructors are ready to begin training you in whatever fighting style you choose. Du-Yun looked at the datapad she offered and did not take it. I need something else. Anything within our power to provide. Communication intercepts from Keth military channels, he said, going back at least 5 years. Translated and organized by region. Su-Min blinked in confusion. You want to listen to their communications? I spent 3 years listening to their guards talk, he explained. I learned their language, their idioms, the way they complain and boast and lie to their superiors. For what purpose? To understand them. She made a note on her datapad, still clearly puzzled. What else? Complete maps of Keth-controlled territory, with supply routes marked, trade dependencies highlighted, and agricultural output listed for every system. That is strategic intelligence, she said carefully. Most of it is classified at the highest levels. Then get it declassified, champion. I do not mean to question you, but should you not be focusing on combat preparation? Supreme Talon Vreth has killed warriors 3 times your size. Du-Yun finally stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city below where millions of people went about their lives, pretending the end was not coming. Do you know how I kept 19 people alive in that camp? He asked without turning around. The reports say you used your medical training. Medical training helped, he admitted. But that was not the real reason. Then what was? I watched, he said simply. Every day I watched the guards. And I learned their patterns, their weaknesses, their fears. He turned to face her. The Keth are a warrior species. And they have built an empire on the belief that strength is the only thing that matters. But strength has costs. What kind of costs? They do not grow their own food, Du-Yun explained. They consider agriculture beneath them, so they conquer species that do it for them. And they transport that food across hundreds of light years to feed their armies. Su-Min's eyes widened slightly as she began to understand their supply lines. Their supply lines are their weakness, he confirmed. An army cannot fight if it cannot eat. And an empire cannot stand if its soldiers go hungry. But attacking supply lines would require a fleet, she protested. We do not have the resources for that kind of sustained campaign. Who said anything about a fleet? She stared at him. The right of the champion does not restrict me to single combat, he continued. It gives me the right to wage war on behalf of the sovereignty by any means I choose until either I am killed or I invoke the right of direct challenge against the enemy leader. You want to wage a one-man war against the Keth Dominion? I want to show them that their strength means nothing when their foundations are made of sand. Sumim was quiet for a long moment, and then she straightened her shoulders. I will get you the intelligence you requested, she said. What else do you need? A ship small enough to avoid detection, medical supplies, and a list of every labor camp the Keth operate. The labor camps? Du Yun's expression did not change, but something cold flickered in his eyes. The Keth have slaves on every agricultural world they control, he said. Millions of workers from dozens of species who have been told they are property. You cannot free all of them. No, he agreed. But I can give them something the Keth never expected them to have. What? Hope. Over the following weeks, Du Yun transformed his quarters into a war room that looked nothing like what the sovereignty's military planners expected. There were no tactical simulations of combat. No weapons training schedules, no analyses of Reth's fighting style. Instead, the walls were covered with supply chain diagrams, agricultural output charts, and detailed maps of slave worker populations across. Keth-controlled Space Admiral Quan visited once and left shaking his head in bewilderment. Minister Park came twice and departed, convinced that the High Arbiter had made a catastrophic error. But Yuna came every third day, and each time she sat quietly and listened as Du Yun explained what he was planning. The Keth have 47 primary agricultural worlds, he told her during one such visit. Those worlds produce 83% of the food that feeds their military. We have tried bombing agricultural targets before, Yuna reminded him. They simply increase output from other sources. Bombing destroys infrastructure, Du Yun agreed. But infrastructure can be rebuilt. Then what do you propose? I propose destroying something they cannot rebuild, which is trust. He pulled up a holographic display showing the command structure of a typical Keth agricultural garrison. The Keth do not trust each other, he explained. Their entire culture is built on competition and dominance, and every officer is constantly looking for ways to undermine their rivals and advance their own position. That is well known. What is less known is how they handle accusations of treason. Yuna leaned forward with new interest. Tell me, when a Keth officer is accused of disloyalty, the accusation itself is considered evidence of guilt, Du Yun said. Their reasoning is that no one would risk making a false accusation because the penalty for failure is death. So they investigate? No, he shook his head. They execute first and investigate later, if they investigate at all, because showing mercy is considered weakness. You want to make them accuse each other. I want to make them tear themselves apart, Du Yun confirmed. One world at a time, Yuna studied him carefully. This is not the strategy of a medic. No, he admitted. This is the strategy of someone who spent 3 years watching an empire from the inside, learning every crack in its armor. And the slaves? The slaves are the key, he said. The Keth believe their workers are broken, that they have no will left, that they will labor until they die without ever raising their heads. Are they wrong? Du Yun remembered the faces of the 18 people he had left behind in that frozen camp. The way they had looked at him when the sovereignty soldiers came to take him away. They are very wrong, he said quietly. And I am going to show the galaxy just how wrong they are. Yuna stood and walked to the window where the city lights glittered against the darkness of space. My council thinks you are insane, she said. They believe I have condemned us to destruction by choosing a human who refuses to even train for combat. And what do you think? She turned to face him with an expression he could not read. I think the Keth have conquered half the galaxy because no one has ever fought them on terms they did not understand, she said. I think they have grown fat and arrogant and blind to any threat that does not look like the threats they have defeated before. And me? You do not look like a threat at all. Una smiled grimly. You look like exactly what they think you are. A small, fragile, insignificant human from an unremarkable species. Is that why you chose me? I chose you because you are invisible to them, she replied. And invisible things can go places that armies cannot. She walked to the door and paused with her hand on the frame. Break them, she said. Break them so completely that they never forget what it cost them to underestimate humanity. Duyum looked at the maps covering his walls, at the supply lines and slave camps and agricultural outputs that represented the beating heart of an empire. I will need to leave soon, he said. Your ship will be ready in 3 days. One more thing. She waited. When I am gone, do not try to contact me, he said. Do not send support. Do not send reinforcements. And do not send rescue missions. Why? Because where I am going, anyone who follows me will die. Una nodded once and left without another word. 3 days later, a small ship slipped away from the sovereignty's capital and disappeared into the vast darkness between the stars. The war was about to change. The war had raged for 107 years, and the Valorian sovereignty was finally dying. High Arbiter Una Saori stood before the holographic map of the galaxy and watched another cluster of stars turn from blue to crimson, marking yet another system lost to the Keth Dominion. Her advisors stood in silence behind her, their faces hollow with exhaustion and despair. How long until they reach the inner worlds? She asked without turning around. 3 months, Admiral Quan Taesung answered, his voice heavy with defeat. Perhaps 4 if we sacrifice the colonial fleets in a delaying action. Una closed her eyes and let the weight of those words settle into her. Mon sacrificed the colonial fleets, 20 million soldiers sent to die so that the core worlds might live a few weeks longer. She had already sent too many to their deaths. And still the Keth came, endless and unstoppable, their war fleets darkening the stars wherever they appeared. There is one option we have not discussed, she said quietly. The room went cold. High Arbiter. Minister Park Jae-won stepped forward with alarm written across his ancient features. You cannot mean the right of the champion. I do. The right was older than the sovereignty itself. A treaty signed in an age when wars were settled by chosen warriors rather than burning worlds. Any dying faction could invoke it, selecting one individual from any species in the known galaxy to fight on their behalf. The chosen could not refuse it. Was binding under laws that even the Keth still honored, for they had been among the original signatories. The Keth have never lost a champion duel, Admiral Quan reminded her. They have killed representatives from the Grimkery, the Moravan, the Selthi, and a dozen other species renowned for combat. I am aware of our history. Then you know this is not a path to victory, Minister Park said. It is merely a different kind of surrender. Una finally turned to face them, and something in her eyes made them step back. Bring me the candidate files, she commanded. All of them. For 3 days. Una reviewed the profiles of warriors from across the galaxy. The Grimkery offered their greatest champion, a 12-foot giant who had torn battleships apart with his bare hands. The Selthi presented an assassin whose venom could kill in seconds and who had never been seen by any target who lived to speak of her. The Moravan suggested a psychic whose mind could shatter steel and whose predictions of combat had never once been wrong. Each of them was magnificent. Each of them was insufficient on the 4th day. She found what she was looking for buried in a prisoner manifest from a minor skirmish. 3 years prior, Kang the Yunhuman for military medic captured during the defense of Outpost 17 and transported to a Keth labor camp on the frozen moon of Rethkestel alive. According to the most recent intelligence reports, "This one," she said to her confused aides. "Bring me this one." Admiral Kwan stared at the file as if she had lost her mind. "High Arbiter, this is a human. I can read." "Humans are not warriors," he protested. "They are small, fragile, short-lived creatures from a single, unremarkable world on the edge of explored space. They joined the galactic community only 80 years ago," Minister Park added. "They have contributed nothing of significance to the war effort beyond basic medical research and some transport vessels." "I am aware of what humans are," Yuna said calmly. "Then why?" Admiral Kwan demanded, abandoning protocol in his desperation. "Why would you waste our final hope on a species that the Keth do not even bother to enslave for combat? They use humans for manual labor because they consider them too weak for anything else." "That is precisely why." The council fell silent. Unable to comprehend her reasoning, "Retrieve the human," Yuna ordered. "Send our fastest ship and bring him here alive." 2 weeks later, Kang De-yoon stood in the great hall of the Sovereignty's capital. He was not what they expected. The man before them was thin, his body marked with scars that spoke of years of brutal treatment. His hair had gone gray at the temples, though he could not have been more than 40 standard years old. His hands trembled slightly, whether from cold or damage or something else entirely, but his eyes were steady. They were the eyes of someone who had seen the worst that galaxy could offer and had somehow continued. Breathing supreme talon breath. Received word of the selection within hours. His response was broadcast across every communication channel in Keth-controlled space, laughter deep, rumbling, contemptuous laughter that echoed through the halls of power on 100 conquered worlds. "The Valorians have chosen a human," he announced to his war council, his massive form shaking with amusement. "A medic, no less. Pulled from one of our own labor camps. His generals joined in the mockery. Perhaps they hope he will bore us to death with bandaging techniques," one suggested. "Or maybe they believe we will die laughing," another added breath, silenced them with a gesture, his 3 eyes gleaming with cruel satisfaction. "Let them have their champion," he declared. "I will face this human myself, and when I tear him apart before the watching galaxy, every species will understand that hope against the Keth is a disease we will cure through extermination." Back in the Great Hall, Yuna stood before the human she had condemned to face that monster. "Do you understand why you are here?" She asked. Edo-Hyun nodded slowly. "You invoked the right," he said, his voice rough from years of disuse. "I am your champion. You cannot refuse." "I know." She studied him carefully, searching for fear, for anger, for any of the reactions she expected. She found none. "You are not what my council wanted," she admitted. "They believe I have made a terrible mistake. Have you?" The question held no challenge, only genuine curiosity. Yuna stepped closer to him, close enough to see the faded marks around his wrists, where restraints had worn grooves into his skin. 3 years ago, you were captured with 42 other prisoners," she said. "Our intelligence reports that 17 of those prisoners are still alive." 19, he corrected quietly. 2 more survived the winter after your last report." 19 then, she acknowledged. "Do you know the survival rate for other species in Keth labor camps?" He waited. "Less than 1% past the first year," she told him. "Your group has maintained a 45% survival rate for 3 years. We helped each other." "No." Yuna shook her head. "According to every account we could gather, you helped them. And you did it with nothing but your knowledge, your determination, and your absolute refusal to let anyone die on your watch." Do-yoon said nothing. "My council sees a small, damaged human," Yuna continued. "They see a species that the Keth dismiss as insignificant, and they cannot understand why I would choose such a champion." She reached out and placed her hand over his scarred one. "I did not choose you for what you are," she said softly. I chose you for what you survived. And I chose you because the Keth have never faced anything like you. What am I then?" Eunice smiled, and there was something ancient and knowing in that expression. "You are a human," she answered. "And I have read your history. And I have seen what your species does when everything is taken from them, and they have nothing left but will." She stepped back and gestured to the doors of the Great Hall. "You have one lunar cycle to prepare, and then you will show the galaxy what the Keth have made the mistake of ignoring." Dayun looked at her for a long moment, and then he nodded. "I will need maps," he said. "Medical supplies, communication intercepts, and information on Keth supply lines. No weapons?" "Not yet," he replied. "First, I need to understand how they think, because I'm not going to fight their war." "What war will you fight then?" The ghost of something that might have been a smile crossed his weathered face. "Mine,"